What if someone you loved vanished without a trace, and when they finally returned, they could no longer speak normally? Instead, every word from their mouth was a riddle. Cryptic phrases, impossible warnings. Messages that made no sense until years later when they came terrifyingly true. These 10 documented cases describe people who allegedly traveled through time and returned fundamentally changed, their minds fractured, their voices speaking only in puzzles no one could solve. Until now. Imagine standing in the middle of a frozen wasteland. The wind cuts through your bones like a blade made of ice. The temperature has dropped to -40 degrees Celsius, and the snow is so thick you can barely see your own hands. This is Siberia in February 1987, one of the coldest, most isolated places on Earth. And yet, through the howling blizzard, a group of local hunters spots something impossible. A man walking barefoot through the snow. He moves slowly but steadily, as if the cold cannot touch him. His feet leave deep prints in the frozen ground, but his skin shows no signs of frostbite. He wears a thick wool coat with brass buttons, a style that hasn't been fashionable since the 1920s. When the hunters approach him, he looks at them with calm, empty eyes. They ask his name. He doesn't answer. They ask where he came from. He tilts his head slightly, and then he speaks. But what comes out of his mouth is not an answer. It is a riddle. The wall falls when the bear sleeps, and the children dance on its bones. The hunters exchange confused glances. They assumed he was mad, perhaps a lost patient from some distant facility. They brought him to the nearest village, and from there, Soviet authorities transported him to a psychiatric hospital near Krasnoyarsk. Doctors examined him thoroughly. Physically, he was healthy. Remarkably healthy, in fact, for someone who had been walking barefoot through a deadly blizzard. But mentally, something was deeply wrong. He could not or would not speak normally. Every response, every answer, every attempt at communication came out as a riddle. Over the following months, the staff documented 47 distinct riddles. Each one was spoken only once, never repeated, delivered with the same eerie calm. The man showed no frustration, no confusion, no desperation to be understood. He simply spoke his cryptic phrases and then fell silent, staring at walls as if he could see something the rest of them could not. And then, years later, the world began to catch up to his words. November 1989. The Berlin Wall falls. The wall falls. December 1991. The Soviet Union officially dissolves. The bear sleeps. And across Eastern Europe, citizens celebrate in the streets, dancing on the rubble of a collapsed empire. The children dance on its bones. One single riddle, spoken in a frozen psychiatric ward 2 years before any of it happened, had predicted the end of Soviet power with haunting precision. Researchers who later reviewed the hospital records discovered more matches. Another riddle referenced a great shadow that poisons the land and the children who glow in the dark. Many believe this described the long-term effects of the Chernobyl disaster. Another spoke of a coup that fails before it begins, matching the August 1991 coup attempt that collapsed within days. Detail after detail, riddle after riddle, events that had not yet occurred were somehow encoded in this stranger's fragmented speech. But here is where the story takes its darkest turn. In August 1991, just days before the coup attempt, the man vanished from the facility. There was no record of discharge, no transfer paperwork, no body. The night staff reported nothing unusual. One moment he was in his room. The next morning, he was simply gone. Security footage from that era was limited, and no explanation was ever found. His final riddle, spoken just days before his disappearance, was recorded by a night nurse. "I returned to where the clocks have no hands." What did he mean? Where did he go? And how did a barefoot stranger in clothing from the 1920s know the Soviet Union would collapse before anyone else in the world had even imagined it? Some researchers believe his mind was fractured by temporal displacement, that seeing the future shattered his ability to speak directly, forcing his knowledge into symbolic language. Others believe he was never from our time at all. The case of the Krasnoyarsk wanderer remains unsolved, but trust me, this is only the beginning. The cases ahead are far more disturbing. Picture yourself standing on a rocky island in the middle of the North Atlantic. The wind howls so fiercely you can barely stand upright. Waves crash against black cliffs below, sending salt spray high into the gray sky. This is the Flannan Isles, a remote chain off the coast of Scotland, home to one of the most isolated lighthouses in the world, and in March of 1962, this desolate place became the setting for a mystery that still haunts researchers to this day. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was already infamous. In 1900, 3 keepers vanished from this very spot without explanation. No bodies were ever found. No answers were ever given. The lighthouse had carried that dark legacy for over 60 years when a man named Angus MacLeod arrived for his rotation, bringing with him his 9-year-old daughter, Moira. The supply boat would not return for 2 weeks. Father and daughter were completely alone. On the 3rd day, Moira went to collect seabird eggs from the cliffs, a simple task she had done many times before. She walked out the heavy wooden door of the lighthouse, waved to her father, and disappeared over the ridge. She never came back. Angus searched every inch of that island. He screamed her name until his voice gave out. He checked the cliffs, the rocks, the cold churning waters below. Nothing, no footprints, no torn clothing, no sign that his daughter had ever existed. For 72 agonizing hours, Angus MacLeod believed his child was dead. And then, on the morning of the 4th day, he found her. Moira was sitting calmly in the lighthouse kitchen, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes staring straight ahead. She was completely unharmed. No scratches, no bruises, no signs of exposure to the brutal weather. But when Angus rushed to embrace her, when he begged her to tell him where she had been, she did not answer the way a child should. She spoke in riddles. The iron birds fall from the red sky when the towers become dust. That was the first thing she said. Angus didn't understand. He asked again, desperate, pleading. Where were you? What happened? Moira looked at him with eyes that seemed somehow older, and she replied, where tomorrow has already happened. She never spoke normally again. Doctors on the mainland examined her thoroughly. Physically, she was perfect. But every attempt at conversation produced only cryptic phrases, riddles wrapped in symbols that no one could decode. Over the following decades, nurses at the Edinburgh Care Facility where Moira eventually lived documented hundreds of these riddles. They filled notebooks with her strange utterances, never quite understanding what they meant, until the world began to catch up. The invisible sickness travels on breath, and the world wears masks of fear. Moira spoke those words sometime in the 1970s. Decades later, during the global pandemic, researchers who had studied her case felt chills run down their spines. Another riddle mentioned numbers eating money until it becomes nothing, a phrase many now connect to financial collapses that occurred long after her death. Some believe the Flannan Isles sit on what Celtic traditions call a thin place, a location where the barrier between worlds grows weak. Others theorize that the same phenomenon that took the 3 keepers in 1900 touched Moira as well. But, unlike them, she came back, and whatever she witnessed on the other side broke something fundamental in the way her mind processed language. Moira MacLeod died in 2008 at the age of 55. She had not spoken a single normal sentence in 46 years. Hours before her death, she delivered one final riddle to the nurse at her bedside. The lighthouse still calls them, and they will answer. Who is them? What is the lighthouse calling? And why did Moira, unlike the keepers before her, manage to return? Some questions have no answers, and some answers come wrapped in riddles we may never solve. But if you think this case was strange, the next one will leave you completely speechless. Now, picture yourself in the busiest place on Earth. 3 million people pass through here every single day. Trains arrive and depart every few minutes, carrying endless rivers of commuters through a maze of platforms and tunnels. This is Shinjuku Station in Tokyo, Japan, a place so crowded that getting lost in the chaos takes only seconds. And in October of 1994, security guards spotted something unusual in this ocean of rushing bodies. A man standing completely still. He wore an expensive suit, dark and perfectly tailored. But something about it seemed wrong. The cut looked unfamiliar, slightly too angular, made from a fabric that caught the fluorescent light in strange ways. There were no tags, no brand markings, no labels of any kind. He carried no wallet, no identification, no briefcase. He simply stood on the platform, motionless, staring straight ahead as thousands of people streamed around him. When the guards approached, the man did not resist. He did not run. He simply turned to face them with calm, empty eyes. They asked his name. He did not answer. They asked where he came from. He tilted his head slightly as if considering the question from a great distance. And then he spoke. The ground shakes and the city kneels when the rooster crows twice. The guards exchanged confused looks. They assumed he was mentally ill, perhaps suffering from some kind of breakdown. They brought him to the station office, and from there, police took him into custody for psychiatric evaluation. Over the next 72 hours, doctors attempted to communicate with him. He spoke fluent Japanese, but his grammar was strange, archaic, using structures that hadn't been common for centuries. And every single response was a riddle. He delivered 23 riddles during his observation period, each one spoken once with eerie precision, as if he were reciting lines from a script he had memorized long ago. He showed no frustration, no confusion, no desire to be understood. He simply spoke his cryptic phrases and then fell silent. 3 months later, Japan understood the first riddle, January 1995. The Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe with devastating force. Over 6,000 people died. Buildings collapsed. Fires raged through the wreckage. The ground shakes and the city kneels. 2 months after that, the Tokyo subway sarin attack killed 13 people and injured thousands more. The invisible poison rides the morning train. One riddle after another began matching real events with horrifying accuracy. The wave swallows the dragon's power. In 2011, the Fukushima disaster crippled Japan's nuclear capabilities. The games return, but no one comes to watch. In 2020, the Tokyo Olympics were held in empty stadiums due to the global pandemic. But here is where the story becomes truly unsettling. After his 72-hour hold, the man was released. No crime had been committed. He walked out of the police station and vanished into Tokyo's endless crowds. No one ever saw him again. But years later, researchers reviewing security footage from Shinjuku Station noticed something impossible. In several frames, the man's reflection in the train windows showed different clothing than what he was actually wearing. Instead of his dark suit, the reflection showed what appeared to be a sleek, futuristic uniform made of metallic fabric. Some frames showed both images simultaneously. The suited man on the platform, the uniformed figure in the glass. As if two versions of him existed at once. The footage is now officially classified as corrupted, but copies still circulate online, studied by those who believe Shinjuku Station sits at some kind of temporal convergence point, a place where millions of human minds create enough psychic energy to thin the barriers of time itself. One of the man's riddles remains unfulfilled to this day. When the cherry blossoms turn black, the island will remember what it forgot. What has Japan forgotten? When will the cherry blossoms turn black? And who was the man who knew Japan's future but could only speak it in puzzles? The answers remain hidden. But trust me, the case you're about to hear makes this one look simple. Imagine standing at the bottom of the world. The sun has not risen in months. The temperature has plunged to negative 50 degrees Celsius. The wind screams across endless plains of ice, carrying snow so thick it erases the horizon entirely. This is McMurdo Station, Antarctica, in June of 2003. And this is where Dr. Henrik Larsson, a Swedish glaciologist with 12 polar expeditions behind him, walked into a blizzard and simply vanished. Larsson was 41 years old, experienced, methodical, and intimately familiar with the dangers of Antarctic winter. When a brief break appeared in the storm, he left the station to check monitoring equipment roughly 300 meters away. A routine task, a 10-minute walk at most. But the blizzard returned faster than anyone predicted. Visibility dropped to zero within minutes. Search parties went out as soon as conditions allowed. They found nothing. No tracks, no equipment, no frozen body. Henrik Larsson had disappeared as completely as if the ice had swallowed him whole. 16 days passed. The station prepared to officially declare him dead. And then, on the 17th morning, he walked back through the doors of McMurdo Station. He was alive, uninjured, not a single sign of frostbite on his exposed skin. His body temperature, measured immediately upon arrival, was exactly 37 degrees Celsius, medically perfect. Physiologically impossible for a man who should have frozen solid within hours of exposure, but something was terribly wrong. Larsson could not explain where he had been. He had no memory of the 16 days, and when colleagues asked him questions, desperate for answers, he did not respond normally. Every word that came from his mouth was a riddle. The ice remembers when the oceans drank the cities. The researchers stared at him, stunned. They asked again, "Henrik, where were you? What happened to you?" He looked at them with calm, distant eyes and replied, "I was when the ice was young." Over the following weeks, Larsen spoke dozens of riddles, each one documented carefully by the station's medical officer. They built their temples beneath the frozen sea, and the temples still wait. The white world was green, then white again, and will be green once more. His words painted pictures of ancient civilizations, drowned cities, and cycles of time stretching across millions of years. Medical analysis revealed something even stranger. Larsen's brain scans showed unusual activity in his temporal lobe, the region associated with time perception. The patterns were unlike anything documented in medical literature. Neurologists who later reviewed the data described them as impossible. And then there were his drawings. After returning to Sweden, Larsen filled notebook after notebook with sketches, ancient cities with towering spires, unfamiliar coastlines, maps showing continents and positions that made no geographical sense. Some researchers who studied his drawings noticed something chilling. Several matched theoretical projections of Earth 50 million years ago, when Antarctica was a temperate forest. Others matched projections of Earth after catastrophic sea level rise, showing futures we have not yet experienced. How could a glaciologist who vanished for 16 days return with visions of both the ancient past and the distant future? Some scientists believe the ice core samples Larsen had been studying contained anomalies, air bubbles holding unknown gas compounds that some have called temporal residue, matter displaced from another time. Perhaps exposure triggered something, perhaps it opened a door. Larsen never recovered his ability to speak normally. He died in Sweden in 2019, having spent his final years whispering riddles to anyone who would listen. His last documented words, spoken hours before his death, still haunt those who heard them. The ice is not sleeping, it is waiting, and it knows your names. What is the ice waiting for? Whose names does it know? And what did Henrik Larsen experience during those 16 impossible days at the bottom of the world? The answers remain frozen. But trust me, the cases ahead are about to shatter everything you think you know. If you're watching this and still not subscribed, you're about to miss something extraordinary. Subscribe now before the next case changes everything. Picture yourself sitting in a hospital room. The fluorescent lights buzz faintly overhead. Machines beep in steady rhythms, measuring heartbeats, tracking brainwaves, monitoring every flicker of life. In the bed lies a teenage boy, motionless, his eyes closed, his body frozen somewhere between life and death. He has been lying in this exact position for 7 years, and you are about to witness the moment he finally wakes up. This is Rochester in Minnesota, September 1985. The boy's name is Marcus Webb. He was 16 years old when he collapsed during gym class back in 1978. No warning, no trauma, no explanation. One moment he was running laps with his classmates. The next, he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Doctors at the Mayo Clinic examined him exhaustively. They found nothing. No brain injury, no drug use, no infection, no reason whatsoever for a healthy teenager to fall into a coma so deep that nothing could wake him. His family kept vigil. Weeks became months, months became years. And still Marcus slept. But he was not entirely silent. Every 7 hours, with clockwork precision, the EEG machines recorded strange bursts of brain activity. During these episodes, nurses reported that Marcus would whisper. The words were faint, barely audible, impossible to understand. They recorded what they could, filling tapes with fragments of sound that seemed like nonsense. Until he woke up. September 15th, 1985, 3:47 in the morning. After exactly 7 years, Marcus Webb opened his eyes. His mother was sleeping in the chair beside him when she heard his voice. But his first words were not questions. They were not confusion. They were not the desperate pleas of someone trying to understand what had happened. They were a riddle. The teacher touches the sky, and the sky weeps fire. His mother didn't understand. She called the doctors. They rushed in, checked his vitals, asked him questions. But every response Marcus gave came wrapped in cryptic phrases. The wall of shame crumbles and brothers embrace. The towers fall twice, once in flame, once in memory. The black tide poisons the Gulf of Dreams. Nobody knew what he meant. 4 months later, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after launch. Teacher Krista McAuliffe died, along with 6 other crew members. The teacher touches the sky, and the sky weeps fire. A riddle spoken before the disaster even happened. Over the following years, more riddles matched more events. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Brothers embracing on the rubble. The September 11th attacks brought the towers down in flame, and memorials ensured they would fall again in memory. The Deepwater Horizon spill blackened the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. Marcus Webb had spoken these events while still in his coma. The whispered recordings, once dismissed as meaningless, suddenly carried terrifying weight. Researchers who analyzed his brain activity discovered patterns never documented in medical literature. Some neurologists theorized that his consciousness had become unstuck from linear time, drifting forward through years that had not yet occurred. Others believed he had somehow connected to a collective timeline, downloading future events that his fractured mind could only express as symbols. Marcus never spoke a normal sentence for the rest of his life. His family learned to interpret his basic needs through his cryptic language, building a strange vocabulary of symbols and riddles. He died in 2008, leaving behind 340 documented riddles. 127 have matched verified events. 213 remain unfulfilled, waiting for their moments to arrive. His final words, whispered from his deathbed, continue to haunt researchers. I was not asleep, I was ahead. And now I return to where the future begins. Where was Marcus Webb's consciousness during those 7 years? Was he dreaming the future, living it? And what does it mean to return to where the future begins? Some mysteries refuse to be solved. But if you think this case is strange, the next one will leave you questioning everything you believe about time itself. Imagine sitting in a darkened control room, surrounded by glowing screens and crackling radio equipment. You are an air traffic controller at Miami Center, guiding planes through one of the busiest airspaces in the world. It is December 2011, a routine night shift like hundreds before it. And then, cutting through the static, you hear a voice that should not exist. A voice belonging to a man who vanished 40 years ago. This is the case of Captain Raymond Torres. In December 1971, Torres was a 38-year-old former Navy aviator flying a routine cargo run from Miami to San Juan. He was experienced, steady, exactly the kind of pilot you want in the cockpit. Weather conditions were clear. There were no distress calls, no mayday signals, no indication of trouble whatsoever. His plane simply vanished somewhere over the Bermuda Triangle, swallowed by the same waters that have claimed so many others. No wreckage was ever found. No body was ever recovered. Raymond Torres was declared lost at sea. His daughter was 7 years old when he disappeared. 40 years later, to the exact month, something impossible happened. Controllers at Miami Center received an unexpected transmission on an old emergency frequency. The voice was male, calm, speaking in fragmented phrases that made no logical sense. At first, they assumed it was interference or perhaps a malfunctioning radio somewhere. But when technicians analyzed the recording, they discovered something that stopped them cold. The voice matched archived recordings of Captain Raymond Torres with 94% accuracy. But there was something different. The voice had aged. It sounded like a man in his late 70s, weathered and tired. Torres would have been 78 in 2011, and every word he spoke was a riddle. I flew through the door that has no hinges. The sky is not empty. They watch from the spaces between seconds. Your children's children will build their cities in the clouds. The ocean holds what time has forgotten. The transmission lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds before cutting to static. Controllers traced the signal to coordinates deep within the Bermuda Triangle. The Coast Guard dispatched a search team immediately. They found nothing. Empty water, clear skies, no aircraft, no debris, no explanation. Investigators pulled every record they could find on Torres. They interviewed his now 47-year-old daughter, playing the recording for her through crackling speakers. She listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. "That was my father," she said, "but different, like he knew something terrible." Voice analysts confirmed the match was too precise to be coincidental. The speech patterns, the cadence, the slight accent from his childhood in Puerto Rico, everything aligned, But how could a man who vanished in 1971 transmit a message in 2011? And why did he sound 40 years older? Some researchers believe the Bermuda Triangle contains temporal anomalies, regions where time bends and stretches in ways we do not understand. Perhaps Torres passed through one of these distortions, aging decades in what felt to him like moments. Perhaps he found a way to transmit back, desperate to send a warning, but his riddles offer no easy answers. I am not lost, I am early. Those 5 words haunt investigators more than any others. What does it mean to be early? Early for what? One phrase from the transmission has never been explained. I will try to warn them, but they will only hear riddles. Was Torres trying to communicate something specific? Did the journey through time fracture his ability to speak directly, forcing his warnings into symbolic language only the future might decode? The monitoring equipment at Miami Center has recorded continuously on that same frequency ever since. No further transmissions have been received. But somewhere over the triangle, in the spaces between seconds, Captain Raymond Torres may still be flying, still trying to reach us, still speaking in riddles we are not yet ready to understand. What was he warning us about? And when will we finally understand? We are about to enter the top 5 cases, and trust me, these will leave you questioning everything. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you do not miss what comes next. Picture yourself standing beneath the blazing Egyptian sun. Sand stretches endlessly in every direction, golden dunes rippling like frozen waves under a sky so blue it hurts to look at. Behind you rises the step pyramid of Djoser, the oldest stone monument in human history. And beneath your feet, hidden tunnels snake through the darkness, passages that have remained sealed for thousands of years. This is Saqqara, November 1923. And this is where Dr. Lionel Ashworth descended into a mystery he would never escape. Ashworth was a British archaeologist, 45 years old, leading a small expedition through the necropolis during the golden age of Egyptian discovery. The world was captivated by Tutankhamun's tomb, found just 1 year earlier. Every archaeologist dreamed of the next great find. Ashworth believed he had discovered something extraordinary, a narrow passage beneath the pyramid that appeared on no maps and bore no markings from previous explorers. He entered alone while his team waited at the entrance. Minutes later, the tunnel collapsed behind him. The rescue effort lasted 9 days. Workers dug through tons of rubble, certain they would find only a corpse. But when they finally broke through into the sealed chamber beyond, they found Ashworth alive. He was sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, hands resting on his knees, eyes wide open, but seeing nothing. There was no food in the chamber, no water, no possible source of sustenance. Yet he had survived over a week in complete darkness. When his colleagues rushed to help him, Ashworth did not respond normally. He spoke, but his words made no sense. They came out as riddles, a strange mixture of English and ancient Egyptian phrases that even the team's translator struggled to follow. The sun split in 2 falls on the land of the rising sun. Nobody understood. They assumed trauma, dehydration, psychological collapse. They brought him to the surface, gave him water, let him rest. But Ashworth never recovered his normal speech. Every sentence, every response, every attempt at communication emerged wrapped in cryptic symbolism. Over the following months, his family documented everything he said. The metal birds carry death in their bellies across the water. The pharaoh's children return to rule, but their kingdom is the invisible web. The sand glass breaks and the sand pours upward. Decades later, these riddles began to match reality. The sun split in 2. August 1945. Atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the land of the rising sun. Metal birds carrying death in their bellies. Allied bombing campaigns that devastated cities across Europe and Asia during the Second World War. The invisible web where modern pharaohs rule. Some believe this references the internet, a kingdom of information controlled by unseen powers. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence came from Ashworth's journal, recovered from the sealed chamber. The entries began normally, documenting the excavation in precise academic language. But the final pages devolved into frantic scribbling. The last legible entry read, "I have seen the room where all times exist at once. The walls show the future as clearly as the past." Photographs taken of the chamber walls revealed hieroglyphs that matched no known dynasty. Some symbols appeared to depict objects resembling modern technology. Researchers dismiss these as pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns in random shapes, but the photographs were quietly acquired by a private collector and have rarely been exhibited since. Ashworth returned to England and never led another expedition. He spent 30 years filling notebooks with riddles, over 2,000 documented by his family. Many match 20th century events with disturbing precision. Many others reference events that may not have happened yet. His final entry, written hours before his death, remains the most haunting. The chamber is not in Egypt. The chamber is everywhere, and it is always open. What did Ashworth find beneath Saqqara? What did he see in that room where all times exist at once? And if the chamber is everywhere, does that mean anyone could stumble inside? Some doors once opened can never be closed, and trust me, the next case proves exactly that. Imagine yourself standing on a cold dock in the middle of the night. The year is 1943. War rages across the globe, and the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard hums with desperate energy. Welders throw sparks into the darkness. Cranes groan under the weight of steel, and somewhere out on the water, a destroyer called the USS Eldridge sits motionless, surrounded by equipment that no ordinary worker is supposed to understand. You are Thomas Brennan, 23 years old, a civilian dockhand working the night shift. You have heard rumors about strange experiments, whispers about making ships invisible to enemy radar. But rumors are just rumors. Until tonight. The first sign is the light. A sickly green glow begins emanating from the Eldridge, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air itself seems to vibrate. Equipment on the dock begins to rattle, and then, without warning, the ship vanishes. Not sinking, not sailing away. Simply gone, replaced by a shimmer in the air where solid steel had been moments before. You step forward, drawn by something you cannot explain. The light intensifies, your skin tingles, your vision blurs, and then you are gone too. 73 hours later, you wake up 300 miles away in Norfolk, Virginia. Your clothing is partially burned. Patches of your skin show strange marks resembling radiation exposure. You cannot remember your name. You cannot remember how you got here, but you cannot stop speaking. The words that pour from your mouth make no sense to anyone who hears them. The thinking machines will think faster than man, and man will forget how to think. The eye in the sky sees all, and privacy becomes a word from the old times. The small box holds all knowledge, but the people grow more ignorant. Navy officials quickly take you into custody. Officially, you are listed as suffering from a psychological episode caused by an industrial accident. But the documents tell a different story. Internal reports reference temporal displacement subject and collateral witness. You were never supposed to be part of the experiment. You simply stood too close. For 6 months, military personnel document everything you say. They fill notebooks with your riddles, recording each phrase with meticulous precision even as they dismiss your words as the ravings of a damaged mind. Eventually, they release you. They give you compensation. They make you sign papers promising never to speak of what happened. But you cannot speak of anything else. Thomas Brennan returned to civilian life, settling in rural Pennsylvania with a family who learned to interpret his strange language. His wife decoded his needs through symbols and metaphors. His children grew up thinking it normal that their father spoke only in puzzles. For 48 years, he never uttered a single ordinary sentence. After his death in 1991, his family released the documents they had kept hidden. Over 600 riddles, carefully recorded across decades. And when researchers began matching them to real-world developments, the results were chilling. The small box holds all knowledge. Smartphones fitting in your pocket, containing more information than ancient libraries. The eye in the sky sees all. Satellites and surveillance systems monitoring every corner of the globe. Thinking machines that think faster than man. Artificial intelligence that now writes, creates, and reasons at speeds no human can match. Thomas Brennan described technologies that would not exist for another 50 to 80 years. He spoke of drones, of facial recognition, of a world where people carry glowing screens everywhere they go, all from a man who vanished in 1943. But one riddle haunts researchers more than any other. When asked what happened to the Eldridge, Brennan would always give the same answer. The ship did not become invisible, it became unstuck. And near the end of his life, he added something even more disturbing. The experiment never stopped. They are still trying to unstick the ship. What did Thomas Brennan witness that night on the docks? Where did he go for those 73 hours? And if the experiment never stopped, what are they trying to unstick now? Some questions are buried for a reason, but the next case digs even deeper. Picture yourself walking through an abandoned city. The streets are empty. The windows are dark. Toys lie scattered in playgrounds where children will never return. The air itself feels wrong, heavy with invisible poison. This is Pripyat, Ukraine. In May of 1986, just weeks after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster turned this thriving city into a ghost town. Soviet soldiers moved through the silence, conducting cleanup operations in one of the most radioactive places on Earth. And in an empty apartment on the 4th floor of a crumbling building, they find something impossible. A child. She is sitting calmly on the floor, approximately 8 years old, wearing a simple white dress that shows no signs of contamination. Her eyes watch the soldiers enter without fear, without confusion, without any of the reactions you would expect from a little girl who has somehow survived alone in a nuclear exclusion zone for weeks. The soldiers check their radiation meters. The readings in the room are off the charts. Lethal exposure should have killed her days ago. Yet she shows no symptoms, no burns, no sickness, no signs of radiation poisoning whatsoever. They ask her name. She does not answer. They ask where her parents are. She tilts her head and speaks. The red flag falls when the wall becomes dust. The soldiers exchange confused looks. They assume trauma, perhaps brain damage from radiation exposure. They evacuated her immediately, transporting her to a military facility in Moscow, where Soviet scientists waited to study this medical impossibility. Over the following months, doctors examined her exhaustively. Her cellular structure showed patterns they had never documented before. Her biological age was impossible to determine. She appeared to be 8, but certain markers suggested she was either much older or much younger than she looked. And she never stopped speaking in riddles. 89 riddles were documented over a 6-month period, each one delivered calmly, without emotion, as if she were reading from a script written somewhere far beyond human understanding. The towers of commerce burn from the wounds of flying metal. The invisible sickness crosses every border, and the world stops moving. The old empire tries to swallow its neighbor and chokes on sunflowers. Nobody understood. The program was classified. The child was given a new identity and placed with an approved family. She disappeared from official records entirely, but her riddles did not disappear. September 11th, 2001. Towers of commerce burning. 2020. An invisible sickness that stopped the world. 2022. An old empire reaching for its neighbor, met with resistance symbolized by sunflowers. One by one, the riddles spoken by a child in 1986 began matching events decades in the future with impossible precision. Leaked documents now refer to her only as Subject P. According to these reports, she grew into adulthood, but never recovered normal speech. Every word she speaks remains wrapped in cryptic symbolism. And here is where the case becomes truly unsettling. These same documents suggest that Subject P is still alive. Her location is classified at the highest levels, and Russian intelligence allegedly consults her before major decisions, treating her riddles as strategic prophecy. Over 60 of her documented riddles remain unfulfilled, waiting for their moments to arrive. But one riddle from her childhood haunts researchers more than any other. When asked about the future of humanity, the little girl in the white dress looked up at the scientists with those calm, empty eyes and spoke words that still have no interpretation. The second sun rises in the east, and the clocks run backward for everyone. What is the second sun? Nuclear detonation? Solar catastrophe? Something we cannot yet imagine? And what does it mean for clocks to run backward? A reversal of time itself? An undoing of everything we know? The child from Pripyat survived what should have killed her. She spoke of events decades before they happened, and somewhere, in a classified location, she may still be speaking. What will her next riddle predict? And are we ready to hear it? Some warnings come too late. But the final case is the most disturbing of all. Imagine standing in a centuries-old observatory in the heart of Vienna. The year is 1997. Ancient stone walls surround delicate instruments designed to map the heavens. Moonlight streams through tall windows, casting silver patterns across wooden floors worn smooth by generations of astronomers. And in the center of a room that was locked from the inside, with no windows open and no possible point of entry, police find a man who should not exist. He has no identification. His fingerprints match nothing in any database on Earth. His clothing is made from a synthetic material that laboratories cannot identify, fabric that reflects light in ways no known textile should. When officers ask his name, he looks at them with calm, ancient eyes and says 4 words that will haunt investigators forever. It is no longer relevant. Over the following 17 hours, Austrian police conduct the most extensive interrogation in their department's history. They record everything. They document every word, and slowly they realize they are witnessing something impossible. The man speaks only in numbered riddles. Each statement begins with a 4-digit number. At first, investigators assume these are codes, references, perhaps identification numbers from some foreign system. But then a young officer notices the pattern. The numbers are years. The twins of commerce fall to the metal birds. September 11th. The Twin Towers. 2004. The wave swallows the shore where the temples stand. The Indian Ocean tsunami that killed over 200,000 people. 2008. The houses of paper collapse and the golden dreams burn. The global financial crisis. 2011. The wave poisons the dragon's breath. Fukushima. 2020. The invisible enemy crosses every border. The pandemic that stopped the world. 2022. The bear reaches for the sunflower and the world divides. A war that reshaped global politics. 156 numbered riddles documented across 17 hours. And here is what makes this case unlike any other. Every single prediction for years that have already passed has come true. Every single one. The accuracy rate is 100%. After 30 days in custody, the man was inexplicably released. Records show a discharge was authorized, but no officer remembers signing the paperwork. No official recalls making the decision. And when investigators reviewed security footage from his cell, they witnessed something that defies all explanation. The man did not walk out. He did not escape. Frame by frame, over the span of exactly 3 seconds, he simply faded. His body became translucent, then transparent, then gone, as if he had never been there at all. The remaining riddles cover years from 2025 through 2147. Some are cryptic, some are terrifying. The sky tears open and the old light returns. 2034. The first child is born who will never die. 2089. The cities float and the ground becomes forbidden. 2147. The loop closes and the beginning speaks to the end. What do these riddles mean? What is the old light that returns? What child will never die? And what happens when the loop closes? But the final riddle in the Vienna Confession is the one that keeps researchers awake at night. It was not numbered. It was not dated. It was spoken as a statement, delivered with absolute certainty in the final moments before the man vanished. I am not the first to come back. I am the last. After me, there will be no more warnings. Why is he the last? What happens after the warnings stop? Have we been receiving messages from the future all along? And is this truly the final one? Perhaps every riddle-speaking survivor throughout history was part of the same chain. Perhaps they were all sent back to prepare us for something coming. And perhaps, with the Vienna Confession, the chain has finally ended. The man gave us dates. He gave us warnings. He gave us a map of the future written in puzzles. The only question now is whether we will solve them in time, or whether time has already run out. These are not just stories. They are warnings wrapped in riddles, messages from people who saw time differently than we do. Perhaps their minds shattered under the weight of what they witnessed. Or perhaps they were trying to tell us something we weren't ready to understand. What will you believe? More importantly, what will you do with what you've heard? Only 30% of you are subscribed. Join us before the next riddle arrives. The clock is already ticking.